Howdy. For today's adventure, we went to a place called Mount Glorious, and I love Mount Glorious. I think it's so cool. You get a great view from one side looking out towards Brisbane and the ocean, and then on the other side, you get an incredible view looking out to this place called Lake Wivenhoe. You can see Lake Wivenhoe in this shot here. Lake Wivenhoe has an area of 100 square kilometers, which is really big for a lake. Now, this particular spot that we found, we looked on a map and we found a few streams flowing around on the mountains called Mount Glorious. And this particular stream we picked, we thought it would have a good chance of there being some fish in it. So we found a car park near the stream. We parked at this car park and there was no signs around, so we went and walked along the side of the road, and we just by chance happened to find a trail. And we went down this trail. Very hard going down this trail. It took about 10 minutes. There was a few burnt out trees along the way, but when we got to the bottom, there was this little creek. And in this little creek, you could see that there was life. And when you see that there is life, you gotta investigate. You gotta have a better look at what's going on. And we had a look in, and you can see there's little schools of fish. One of the best ways of finding out what's going on in a creek, you'll be amazed by what you see, is just to lie down on your stomach on a rock and have a good look in the creek. You'll see all these signs of life that if you're just walking by, you wouldn't notice. And when you're still, the fish relax and they'll swim around naturally, and you can watch them in their habitat. And an even better way is to put on some goggles and have a look underwater. And there was all these flying insects above this pool of water, and they were supporting the fish living below it. There was some rainbowfish and some hardyheads living in this pool here. The rainbowfish were crimson spotted rainbowfish, and we'll get a better look at them later. And they like to lay their eggs on those roots that you see in this shot here. If you keep them in captivity, you might have a mop, and they'll lay their eggs on the mop. They like roots and dangly plants like those that we saw to lay their eggs in. And I thought I'd have a look under this leaf here and see what we saw. And in the right corner, you can just see a few fish. Those fish are some of my favorite fish in the world. I think they're so cool, and I'll tell you what they are in a minute. We get a good look, and there's some shrimp. You see those glass shrimp on the leaf as well. Glass shrimp are really cool. They're totally see-through. And if you remember from our last video, the glass shrimp we saw at Cedar Creek, unfortunately, were infested with this parasite called a horsehair worm. Thankfully, though, in this creek, we saw no signs of parasites. And it was really important, because we'd been to a creek with parasites, that we cleaned all of our equipment thoroughly before going here, which I made sure to do. This was another little pool that we decided to have a look in, and you can see all these rainbow fish. They're schooling, they're behaving the way that they normally would, and they were not bothered by us at all, which is a really good sign. It means that people and animals are not going through this pool. There was a trail around it, and I don't think people are bringing their animals here, but there's also these orangey-looking fish, which are a type of hardyhead, I think, but there is not a lot of information about hardyheads, and there's not that many pictures of the different variations of them. Some of them look like a regular hardyhead, or maybe a smelt, but as you can see, some of them had an orangey-red tinge to them, which I hadn't seen before. And I found really interesting, and I couldn't find any information online or in my field guide about them. But the rainbows, you could see lots of these rainbows, and these were special rainbows. They're the crimson spotted rainbows, and they're found all throughout southeast Queensland. But I've never seen ones like these, and these ones were unique because they had an orange fin on their top fin and their bottom fin. Both of them were orange in the males. The females did not have much colour. And you can tell the males because they have a really distinct crimson spot where their gills are. And they're bigger and more colourful than the females. But there's generally less males than females in these large groups. Oh, and I was blown away by this. This was the most exciting moment of my adventurous career. It was a brown crayfish. And that may not sound that interesting to you, but I've only ever seen blue crayfish. I've never seen a brown one. And I was trying to find what species this could be. But once again, I couldn't find any information about them. So I asked around, and some people said it could be a blue claw crayfish, and they have a lot of variations. Sometimes they are totally blue, like a really, really bright blue. Sometimes they're grey, and potentially sometimes they're brown, although I couldn't find any pictures or information about what they look like when they're brown. But it does kind of look similar to a blue claw, so potentially it was a blue claw. But you can see its claws, they were distinctly orangey brown. There was no blue in this particular crayfish. It was the only one we've seen so far. And on this journey, it was the only crayfish we saw. So I just happened to spot it by chance, and I was so excited. I had to film it for as long as I could. And I told my friend to come over and have a look, but by the time he came over, the crayfish had moved along. Crayfish are really interesting because they have this hard exoskeleton, and they'll have a little cave that they retreat to feel safe in. And when they want to grow bigger, they actually remove this shell, this exoskeleton, and they come out and they're really soft and really vulnerable. And when they're in that state, they like to find a nice crevice that they can hide under until they can regrow enough of their shell to feel confident to come out and not feel threatened by the fish and other crayfish, because crayfish will fight each other. They're very territorial, and they will harm each other, so they've got those strong shells to defend them against basically anything. As for the size, I'm not even sure what species it is, so I can't speculate on what size it is, but if it is a blue claw, they can get anywhere up to sort of 10 to 15 centimeters at their biggest. And you can see these rainbows. The rainbows are the big ones with a green stripe going down them, a yellow stripe under that, and then a light blue shimmer on the top of them. And then those other fish, which I think are either hardyheads or smelt, you can see them swimming along with the rainbow fish too. They're both schooling together, which was very interesting to see. And now we see the long-armed shrimp down in the bottom right corner. We're going to see another long-armed shrimp under this rock. You see the glass shrimp, they're smaller, and they have little arms, but the long-armed shrimp is much larger. They get to be about 10 centimeters long, but then their claws can be an additional 10 centimeters long. And they're big arms with big claws on the end. And when they have babies, the females will keep the eggs underneath their little feet at the back of their body, and they will fan them constantly, getting air to flow across their eggs. And because they're see-through, you can actually see the eggs developing, and you can see these little shrimp. And then eventually, when they're big enough, they get out of their mother, and they go and they'll eat algae and microorganisms and bits of plant matter. They'll eat dead fish or anything that they can scavenge, but mainly they eat algae. They're a very, very passive shrimp, although the long-armed shrimp have the potential to catch things because they have those long arms, but the glass shrimp don't have those long arms, and they tend to just pick off bits of algae and eat that. Now, this was a deep pool, and it had an overhang, and an overhang means that there'll be murky water, and there's always something interesting in murky water, but it can be hard to see in murky water. Thankfully, though, this pool was very clear, and it had these fish that I couldn't capture on camera, and I haven't been able to discover what they are, but they looked almost like a short, fat gudgeon, and they were black with white spots on them. And they behaved differently to the other fish, and I only saw 2 of these fish, and they were much more afraid of me than the other fish. And just about every rock we looked on had shrimp. There would have been possibly tons of shrimp in this creek. There was so many glass shrimp, and not very much algae because the shrimp were eating it all. You can see them there rifling through the fields of algae. They're almost like a cow eating grass, except they're much better for the environment than cows are. You can see them picking the little bits of algae up and eating them. And algae grows when there's sunlight and oxygen in the water. And carbon dioxide, sorry. It eats the carbon dioxide and produces oxygen into the water. And there was not many plants in this creek, as you can see. It was mainly rocks and sticks and leaves that had fallen in. And I saw this really cool overhang, and I had a good look around this overhang. It had lots of spider webs in it, and we actually saw a lot of spiders on our expedition. They were all near the water as well, possibly getting a drink, possibly hunting. I'm not sure. We didn't see them hunting, but that would make sense because they wouldn't need to stay near the water for very long to get a drink. And as I was going to cross this, I stumbled on this plant and a frog jumped out of it. And the frog, it was this lovely brown native frog, and we got a good look of him. What an incredible creature. And then I got a bit too close, and away he hops back into his lovely grassy plant there. Now we're having a look at the other side of this pool, and this is where it gets really exciting, because we get to see one of my all-time favorite fish. Now, I should give some backstory of why I love these fish so much. When I was a child, we went out and we found some of these fish in a creek, and I caught 2 of them. And we brought them home, and from those 2, they had babies, and they are now in my ponds, and I have maybe 30 of them, and I've kept them for at least 15 years, so I've done really well with them. And when they... Oh, and there's the first one. It's a little one. They get much bigger than that, and they are called a purple spotted gudgeon. Now, purple spotted gudgeons are found around southeast Queensland, and I've never seen them before, and I've always wanted to see them in the wild. I've caught them, but I've never seen them. I just happened to catch them by chance and had no idea what they were until I got them home and had a look at them in my fish tank. That being said, you shouldn't catch fish from the wild. I was a child, I didn't know any better. But I've looked after them, and I have a healthy population of them in my ponds to this day. And when they lay eggs, the female will lay the eggs, and then the male will come over, and he'll hang out with the female for a bit, and he'll fertilize the eggs. But then the female will leave, and the male will stay with the eggs, and he'll look after them until they hatch. And he can look after them for a week or maybe 2 weeks. And if anything or anyone, such as the female, comes near the eggs, he will attack them. He guards those eggs as well as he possibly can. And they're kind of a solitary fish, but it was very interesting seeing their behavior in the wild, because although they didn't school, they were still near each other. So they'd have all their own little space, but close to the other purple spotted gudgeons, but definitely not in a school. Which I found very interesting, because seeing them in an artificial environment, they're totally solitary. They don't go anywhere near the other gudgeons unless you're feeding them. And we can see a little bit bigger gudgeon, and he had a go at one of those shrimp. I'm not sure if he got it, but you just saw him just go for one of them there. And they were much more afraid of me. They were very cautious, but they were also interested in what was going on. And if you can see those spots going down that gudgeon's body, they are a lovely dark purple, and they can have a blue or green ring going around those spots, and there's a bigger one. This isn't their full size, but that's getting there. That's close to their full size, and I'd say that's a female gudgeon. The females are much bigger than the male gudgeons. I'd say at max they could be maybe 12 or 15 centimeters long. And they'll eat little fish, they'll eat shrimp, They'll eat insects. They'll eat just about anything that they can fit in their mouth. They're some of the most incredible fish that I have ever seen. They have these wonderful purple stripes going down them as well, which you can see on his face, on her face, near her gills. And you can see those purple spots, those distinctive purple spots, all over this gudgeon. What an amazing creature. I absolutely adore them. And I never thought I'd see them in the wild, and I'm so happy that I have. That was a really big moment for me. And this was some more of that pool to give you an idea of what the environment was like. As you can see, it's all rocky, lots of shrimp, not much algae because the shrimp are eating all the algae, and also leaves and sticks from the nearby plants and trees. And the environment was quite interesting because, as you saw at the beginning of the video, the upper area was very dry and it was mainly just trees. But as we got down closer and closer to the creek, there was all these grasses and ferns, and it was like a rainforest. It was a very different environment, and that's because of the creek. And this creek must flow all year round, and that's what's able to provide the conditions that these rainforesty plants can live in. We can see a large school of the rainbows and hardyheads / smelt, I'm not sure which ones they are, swimming off in the distance. In this pool alone, there would have been at least 200 of these fish. It was a really big school. And they'll eat mosquito larvae. The mosquitoes will land on the water, they'll lay their eggs, and then when their eggs hatch, the rainbows and hardyheads and smelt, they will go off and eat all those baby mosquitoes. So they're a really good way of keeping mosquitoes under control. There's some more purple spotted gudgeons. When you see them on the ground, they blend in very well. Despite their purple spots, they actually are perfectly camouflaged when they aren't moving. So you may spot some in the video that I didn't even spot myself. Leave a comment if you do. Tell me where you spotted these extra purple spotted gudgeons. And there's the school having a good swim around. I think these are either hardyheads or smelt. There's 2 gudgeons. And now we're having a look at some more of the glass shrimp hanging out on the underside of this rock. No freshwater plants were growing in this creek. I think perhaps it's the area. There just aren't freshwater plants in this area. We'll have to do some more adventures to find out where the freshwater plants are in southeast Queensland. If there are freshwater plants in southeast Queensland, there must be, surely. I'm determined to find them. What an amazing pool. Very shallow, and then there's a drop. And now we're having a look under that overhang. It's a very cool little cave in here, but I was quite frightened to put my hand in because there was a lot of spider webs, and I'm not that keen on spiders. But there was a lot of gudgeons in this pool, and I couldn't get a very good shot of them, but they were all over this. They really like the dark environment. And now, to get to the next section, we had to go through the water, and this water was cold. It was maybe between 5 and 10 degrees Celsius. It was chilly. And it was very murky, and you couldn't see the bottom, and there was a lot of big rocks, so it was quite dangerous to walk through, because when there's big rocks, you want to be extra careful when you're walking through the water, because you can graze yourself on the rocks, or you can step on one and your foot can get stuck between the rocks, and then you're in for a lot of trouble. So it's really important that if you go on any expeditions on your own, that you bring someone else with you. in case you do get into any trouble. And you can see this wonderful rainforesty environment. These marvelous trees and ferns and plants and grasses. Really, really incredible to see. Some lovely ferns there. Now, as we got further up this creek, the water got much deeper that we had to cross, and it got much, much scarier having to go through deeper water. As you can see here, this is around my chest, and it was cold, and I couldn't see the bottom, and I had a backpack that I didn't want to get wet, so it was very hard to get through here. And as I said, there was a lot of boulders, so it was I had to go very carefully to avoid injuring myself. And one of the things that I found quite disconcerting was looking at the sides. There was often spiders on the rock, so I didn't want to accidentally, stumble upon one in the water. Now this bit, we were told that there was a deep section, and we thought, okay, well, we'll walk through the deep section and put our bags on our head. We got in, as you can see, maybe 5 meters, and then the water was well past our necks. So my friend had his bag above his head, and he walked out, and then it just dropped, and he had to really scramble to get back because, he obviously didn't want to get the bag wet, and that was where our camera failed. We did attempt to get to the next part of the creek. My friend made it up there. We had to swim, and we had to leave our bags behind, so I swam, I got to the end, but I couldn't get a good grip to get up, and I didn't feel confident going up there, so I thought I'll play it safe, and I'll swim back and wait for my friend to get up there, because he managed to get up there with ease. He's a much better climber than I am. And also, I saw a lot of spiders on the rocks, and I didn't really want to accidentally touch one of them. And as I said, the camera failed, so we didn't get any of that footage of me looking terrified swimming through the murky water. It was very cold, and I was shivering, and I had to sit in the sun and do some breathing exercises to warm myself back up again. And now we're heading back downstream to see what lies further down the creek, because it was very murky up here, because this was sort of the main area where people would come, and they obviously kicked up all the silt at the bottom of the creek and made it very hard to see what was going on, so I have no idea how many fish were here compared to the rest of the creek. And now this was a bit further down. We had a good look in this bit of the creek, and I didn't expect there to be any fish in this section because it was quite shallow, but as you can see, there was loads of the crimson spot rainbows, and you can see there on that male his lovely crimson spot right around where his gills are. And then that beautiful green color going down them. You can see why they're called rainbowfish, because they have that lovely blue on the top of them, the red of their fins, then the dark green, the yellow, and then the bright crimson red, and also a sort of white, silvery color on their belly as well. And these rainbows, I haven't seen crimson spot rainbows with a red dorsal fin. Or that lower fin. I've only seen them with a black fin. So I wasn't able to find any information about, or any pictures of rainbows with the red fins. So I couldn't find any information if this is a different type of crimson spot, or if this is just what happens to them at a certain time of year or through certain conditions. But they had that really interesting reddy orange fin, which I was just blown away to see. I've never seen them so colourful before. And they were not afraid of the camera. As you can see, they would happily swim by. They were coming up and investigating. They were investigating me. And a really healthy population of them. I was so pleased to see all these fish. And then we also see in the lower water the hardy heads. I'm pretty sure these ones are hardy heads. and they sort of stayed lower in this section of the creek, but they still sort of swam around with the rainbows. It was like that they were all part of the same school swimming together. You can see the group of the hardyheads there, pecking around on the bottom, trying to find some baby shrimp to eat, or, you know, maybe some kind of water insects that they could eat. These are all great fish to keep in an aquarium, and the crimson rainbow fish were actually the first fish from Australia to make it to the aquarium trade outside of Australia, and they have since become very popular because they'll school together. They're quite a hardy fish. They're very, very unique when they're swimming around in their schools, and very interesting to watch, and they'll breed as well, so you can have generations of rainbow fish, which is a very rewarding experience as a fish keeper to have. And you can see this very shallow creek that all those fish were just swimming in. And once again, we wouldn't have realized this unless we stopped and had a good lay down and a really good look in the creek for a good 5 to 10 minutes. And then we realized there's a lot of fish in here. We're going to have a good look around. Less gudgeons, but there was still a few gudgeons, but much less than in the deeper pool. And you can see lots of roots where the rainbows would be able to lay their eggs. And getting a bit further down now, the creek was not flowing as much here and very shallow, and there wasn't any fish in this section of the creek at all. And here we saw a little snake going up the tree. It was a really pretty snake. It had a yellow belly and a black back and these lovely white shiny stripes going down its back. It was just a tree snake. It wasn't harmful to us, and because when I walk around, I try to make a lot of noise and movement. So if there is a snake, it will feel and see movement and get out of the way. So it's very important if you're walking around to sort of stamp your feet and move around a lot, because snakes can see movement really well. So if you're moving, a snake will see you. Snakes want to get away. They don't like being near people. So if you want to experience a snake, you want to stay very still, keep a good distance to have a look at them. And now we got to this pool. And this pool, it looked shallow. It didn't look like there was much going on. And there was these nice white cotton-looking flowers around. But after we stuck around for a bit and had a look in, we realized there was a lot more going on under the surface. And here's a glimpse of those wonderful creatures, more of the rainbow fish, and then this interesting looking hardyhead-like fish. And I say hardyhead-like because I've never seen a hardyhead with a bright orange body before. I couldn't find any pictures of ones with a bright orange body. Maybe someone out there knows what type of hardyhead these are, or maybe they could give me some more information about, maybe it's part of their breeding cycle. Just leave a comment if you know about hardyheads, and if these are in fact hardyheads, or if I'm wrong and there's some other species. And you can see here there's a lot of algae, and there's a lot of algae because there's not many shrimp. I didn't see any shrimp in this section of the creek here. And also, not as many gudgeons. There were a few gudgeons, but not as many. Predominantly rainbows in this section. There's one gudgeon, two gudgeons. And those lovely big school, totally not afraid, because I imagine people rarely come here. They have nothing to worry about. They have plenty of food. Humans haven't quite got into this habitat. They haven't built near it. It's all national park. And there's a white gudgeon. I think that gudgeon either had some sort of genetic mutation which made it whiter, or perhaps it was malnourished. And this water was quite cold, and it was connected to the main creek, but the main creek sort of flows above ground and then underground. and it had flowed underground to get to this point. And you can see they're swimming around my legs, and this was really cool to see because I could stand there and watch these fish. I watched them for ages swimming around me. It was really exciting to see because I'd never seen rainbow fish so unafraid and swimming around before. Well, actually, I'd never seen rainbow fish in the wild before, but any fish willing to swim around my ankles like that, I'd never experienced. It was really, really exciting. And there's a lot of birds here. I didn't get any audio of them, but they had these lovely songs. And there were small birds, and there were a lot of them. And the reason that they're here, obviously, is for the water. And this section being a lot more secluded than the rest of it, they could easily not be disturbed by any humans or predators. And they could get into the water. And look at all those fish. All those happy, healthy fish. No signs of disease. All a good size. And hopefully in a few months we'll come back and they'll have bred and we'll get to see all the babies. Now there was this other section. This section was cut off from the main portion of the creek and it was warm. When we went in here, the water was quite warm and it was noticeably warm. And there was a lot of tadpoles here. There wasn't tadpoles in the rest of the creek. And I think the tadpoles were here because of this pool's unique warmth. And I think this pool was warm because it wasn't connected to the rest of the creek and it had a lot of decaying plant matter and this detritus as well, which was keeping in... Oh, there's a little fish there I hadn't noticed before. Next to this tadpole... And the decaying plant matter will keep the water warm, and also being in the sun will keep it warm as well. So when these plants break down, they give off heat, and that heat stays trapped under all of this layer of detritus, and it keeps this pool warm. And that's perfect for tadpoles. And you can see these tadpoles were big. This tadpole was at least an inch across, and its body was probably also about an inch long, excluding its tail. I'm not sure what species it was, but I'm fairly confident it was a native. It didn't look like a cane toad. It was much bigger than cane toads. And there was a lot of them. There was so many in here. We didn't quite see any with little arms and feet yet. But they were really big for the stage of their life. I'd love to see them when they're frogs. Hopefully they're like that brown frog that we saw earlier. But it's very hard to tell what species a tadpole is. There's some more more fish, sorry. There wasn't any shrimp in this section. Or very few shrimp in this section. And now we continued further down the creek, following these white flowers. There was a lot more flowers down in this section of the creek. It was much more secluded. I don't think people came down here very often at all. In fact, we didn't see anyone coming down this way until the very end. There was one man walking down to have a look. But it's not a swimming section, so I think the only people going down here would be hiking. And much less fish, and the water was much shallower. There was much fewer deep pools. But as you can imagine, when it rains, this creek would flow. It would flow very, very well. All of this would be underwater when it rains. And that's how the fish would change pools. They would get to new sections of the creek, and hopefully the water would stay there long enough for them to establish a good population, and then continue spreading down the creek. And now we're back at this section, and I just captured a bird. You just ever so slightly see the bird flying away, but they were tiny and very quick, and every time I tried to film one, they were too quick for the camera. And here's a spider who's got a very good spot there above the water. He's going to catch any insects trying to get in or out of the water. And there was a lot of those, you can see in the bottom right, there's a swimming beetle that jettisons along the top of the water. There was a lot of those, and that actually made filming very difficult because they create ripples, which create shadows, and it makes it very hard to see the environment underwater. But they were very common in this creek. And I decided to go on a little expedition on my own just to see what was down here. And all these wonderful grasses and plants, and lots of lovely flowers. It's all really promising to see. And you can imagine that all the creeks around the southeast Queensland probably would have once looked like this. Such awesome plants. I really wish my garden looked like this. And there wasn't really a trail going down here. I was making my own trail. Because this section was very remote. It was much further than the hiking sections or the small trails where hikers had made a path. And I'm treading very carefully because obviously we'd seen a few snakes and I wanted to make a lot of noise and movement so I didn't accidentally step on a snake or step near a snake. I really like snakes. I just don't like to startle them when they're close to me. I want to admire them from a distance, and when you admire a snake, you want to be very still because snakes cannot see you if you're being still. They're very good at tracking movement, but when you're still, you're basically a tree to them. They don't know you're there. And I've got some creature on my arm there, which startled me later on. Here's one of those lovely flowers. What amazing colours. It's got orange and red and yellow. And we saw some bees on these flowers, and that's why I was filming, but the bee flew away. Really cool flowers. And here was a bit of a trail that some hikers had made. Quite an overgrown trail by this point, though. And it got less and less rainforesty the further down. So just 5 meters away you can see the rainforest stops and it's trees. It's gum trees, which is fine. It's just interesting to see the change of environment because of the water that these plants rely on. So ferns and grasses, they really do much better when there's water around constantly. They really thrive when there's a lot of water. Gum trees, they don't need anywhere near as much water. And when we were walking back, we saw another snake. It was the same kind of snake, and you get a much better view of this snake. I had to be very careful. I was waiting for about 5 minutes before this snake felt comfortable enough that I was a tree for this snake to come out and have a good look around. No doubt the snake was looking for some frogs or little insects that he could chomp down on. Really beautiful pattern. It had this lovely yellow belly and then this darker top. But then when the sun shone, it had this shiny white stripes going down it. I don't think it was a python, I think it was a type of tree snake. It had a very small head and was very afraid of me. Like most snakes. Most snakes do not like people. They like to keep away from people. And there's another one of these schools. These multi-schools of rainbowfish and hardyheads all darting around together. And this was a shallow section of creek as well, so I didn't expect there to be any fish, but look at all the fish. And now it's time to start heading back. We were exhausted by this point after the swimming, the walking through chest-deep water, the hiking over big fallen trees and boulders. You can really see it in my face that I'm much tireder now than at the beginning. And I found this interesting. This section was covered in red algae because it gets sun all day and doesn't have any shrimp. I think because the water's so shallow and there wasn't really any deeper pools connecting this bit, so there was no shrimp to keep the algae under control. And here's a really big tree that's fallen down, possibly because of a strangler fig that grew alongside this tree and eventually got so heavy that it pulled the tree down. Although it could have fallen down from a storm, or if there was a strong flood going through here when it rains. Or perhaps a combination of all of them. And now we start the ascent up this. This was a long ascent. It took at least 15 minutes to get up there. It was very hard going. This trail is dirt. There's no rocks on it. There's roots. That's basically what your steps are. And I had to keep gripping onto plants and stuff to stop myself from slipping. Very, very slippery going up there. And you can really see how tired I am. For the next few days afterwards, my whole body was sore. I could barely walk for how sore it was. I had to have a sit down halfway up and have some water. And then push on. By this point, I didn't want to go back. I really wanted to stay, but it was getting dark. And we'd been here all day and had a really, really incredible experience. Well, I hope you enjoyed that adventure. I hope you saw some species that you hadn't seen in their natural habitats before. I hope you learnt something, and I'm really glad that you watched and experienced what Mount Glorious is like with me. So keep it murky, and I hope to see you on our next adventure.